Hello, everybody. My name is Ray. Welcome to the Evangelical Dark Web. Tonight, we are doing a little bit of a variety in that we're going to talk about the Iowa caucuses. We're going to talk about the shifting Overton window with regards to Martin Luther King Jr., who's not to be confused with a certain reformer, unlike certain Gospel Coalition blogs did that earlier this week. And then we're going to talk about some other topics that have come up. So Anthony is joining me tonight on this live stream to break down a number of topics. So how are you doing tonight?
All as well. And I seemingly have broken the internet and all of discernment industry and with the Alistair Banks story. So.
Yes. So for those who don't know, I'm not the one who writes all the articles on Evangelical Dark Web. I write like 8 out of 10 at least. But every now and then Anthony writes one, and he's written 2 in the last week that are like the top 2 of the top 3 articles in the last week he's written. One of them on Jonathan Rumi and the other one on Alistair Begg. He wrote the article. I did the editing of the article and the video presentation of the article, but he actually wrote the article and found the story. So this is a team effort at Evangelical Dark Web, and just want to highlight that. And yes, that story has broken the internet, and it's like the rare time where we've started something and then gotten much of the credit for it at Evangelical Dark Web. So that's kind of an interesting experience, and it wasn't me who wrote it. But yeah, we do a lot of coverage like this regularly, and this time it kind of set off an entire news cycle in Christian media that's not even done yet. I would beckon I would bet a lot of money that Christian Post is going to cover this controversy now, and they're generally like 4 or 5 days behind. So I'm getting comments that he started late. No, he didn't. So it said 9 o'clock when I hit the start button, and then more Anthony, less Ray. Wow. Feeling the love already, Yellow Moth. So we're going to interact with a lot of chat tonight because we're going to have a fun show. Going to start breaking down the Iowa caucuses. But first, I want to let you know, you can support Evangelical Dark Web at evangelicaldarkweb.org/join. That's our Patreon-like system. And you get more articles, and you get to direct some of the research efforts at Evangelical Dark Web as a benefit and thank you for doing so. And we do have an upcoming book, Winning Not Winsome, 10 Commandments of Spiritual Warfare. And, certain tier levels get that copy sent to them. But anyway, we're going to start off with the Iowa caucuses. I really only have 2 takeaways from this. And they're going to be pretty, provocative, to say the least. But keep in mind, I have experience working on campaigns. I have run for office before. And I can tell you a thing or two about primaries that are going to be pretty prejudiced. So let's just break down the 2 things. One, this was an unmitigated disaster for Ron DeSantis. I don't think there's any ifs, ands, or buts. I endorsed Ron DeSantis earlier this week officially on Evangelical Dark Web, just in an article and video, even though I've said as much in the past who I've supported, and I've been pretty open about that. I just decided to make it official before any voting starts because there's no courage in waiting.
Now, how far would you go in unmitigated disaster?
Well, we'll break the points down.
Okay.
So one, it was an unmitigated disaster for Ron DeSantis. I like to win. There's no win to be found in the Iowa caucuses results for him. He lost badly. And number 2, it's just boomers being boomers. This really has nothing to do with Ron DeSantis as a candidate, and has everything to do with the boomer cons and the generation of boomers that really loves Donald Trump.
I might push back a little bit on that, but
no, I do think there's a segment of Trump people who are younger that kind of get it. But if we're talking about boomers who vote in primaries, they don't get it.
I'm not going to argue that the people aren't the problem, or that the people aren't
Yes,
largely
I'd say the
stupid.
people are the problem
But
100%.
I do think, I mean, the man in the mirror, the man has to look at himself in the mirror and wonder what he did wrong. And DeSantis did make a lot of mistakes. He didn't quite commit to a message that would translate from a governor to the governorship in Tallahassee to the White House. Like, I don't like, again, a lot of the benefits that people are already receiving from Ron DeSantis taking up fights in Florida, and obviously he had the like his primary tactic was just to pivot to policy and pivot to his record. But again, your record in the minor leagues needs to be able to translate into the majors. And to some extent, he's able to convey that, but not necessarily on everything that matters. The other thing I think he did was, he was kind of following Nikki Haley to be president of Israel. And his foreign policy presentation was a disaster. And that's because those debates asked a lot of questions about foreign policy, and he's taking bullets that Donald Trump's not taking on foreign policy.
I kind of see where you're coming from, but here's the thing. There are some miscalculations that Ron DeSantis made. One of them is that because he had a lot of donors in the beginning, when the donors realized that he was serious about being socially conservative, they left him. That's the Republican Party base. You look at the Koch brothers and a lot of mega donors, they're liberals in the Republican Party.
But that's Nikki Haley.
No, but they started out with Ron and went to Haley. So that was something that he miscalculated on. He thought voters would be a lot more angry about COVID and Trump. He miscalculated on that.
You saw that in 2022, though, that voters were not angry enough about COVID. And again, how do your voters get angry about COVID when they all got 80% of American adults got the jab? Then that's basically saying, yeah, you got to admit that you messed up and that you injected poison into your arm. And a lot of those are Republicans. And again, DeSantis also, got the J&J to, I guess, one and done it. So
at least he promoted the least harmful of the four. So with that said, the other thing is that people view Trump as an incumbent, rightly or wrongly. And here's where I'm going to go back at the boomers. They always vote for incumbents in primaries. Why do you think 92% of incumbents get reelected, or whatever the statistic is? Because in primaries, better candidates lose. And usually the establishment or whoever the incumbent is wins a primary. So that has very little to do with Trump v. DeSantis. That just has to do with boomer voting habits. I've seen this as a candidate. They vote for incumbents. They vote for who they're told to vote for. They vote for establishment. The young people vote anti-establishment. So one thing that's been said is that, Ron DeSantis is a perfect candidate for 20 years ago. And you look at these stats, complete opposite is true. Donald Trump won the boomers 56%. Second place was Nikki Haley at 24%. So he more than doubled her with the BoomerCon vote. And then DeSantis had 17% of that. That means his issue, and I've said this all along, his issue is with the BoomerCons. He's weakest with the BoomerCons. He needs to win to the BoomerCons. Well, that's why I thought he went a little hard on the Israel messaging, because BoomerCons love Israel. So
but I actually saw his polls dropped in October.
And why do you think that is?
Israel, given that was the primary.
Or do you think that Nikki Haley just scarfed up the Zionist vote even harder?
Well, she was doing some scarfing the way Kamala Harris and
for sure
with Willie Brown. Now that's, and again, you can't out debase yourself against Nikki Haley when it comes to a foreign conflict.
Right, and I don't think he did. So
he did when you combine it with the Harvard stuff and a lot of the other news cycles. Again, I have an article in the queue about the need for identity politics, and I don't think Ron DeSantis connected with people on an identitarian level. Instead, he was very much just doing Chris Rufo conservatism. And offering affirmative action to Jewish students at Florida
Now, to
University.
be fair, he worded that terribly, but the policy does extend to Christians also. But yeah, not a fan of how it was worded
Well, marketed.
or marketed. Both are not very good. So, but on the opposite end of the spectrum, DeSantis won an age demo, and that's
Well,
17 to 29
but
year
does he win an
olds.
age demo with Ramaswamy out of the race?
Yeah, he won the.
No, no. If you take Ramaswamy's 21%, would he
Does
still?
Ramaswamy's 21% leave? Does he still win that? Yes, I think he still wins that.
Well, okay, fair enough.
These are
But
young
it's a
people
lot
that know
closer.
who. These are young people who know who Trump is and decided against him anyway.
But it
These
would
are
be a
old
lot
people
closer.
who didn't know who Ramaswamy is or just are so devoted to Trump. Only 3% of boomers in this race voted Trump. And we have Ramaswamy, young people, 21%.
Which
That's
I'm
14 points less than DeSantis.
which I'm surprised, but I guess Ramaswamy wasn't on Fox News enough to get him a lot of that boomer vote.
So, and then when you go with the 30 to 44 age group, DeSantis drops to 27%, Trump drops to 41%. So the idea that DeSantis's message is like 20 years in the past is just wrong. It's actually quite the opposite because he's actually the one who's getting the votes of people who have a future, and Trump is dominating the old people vote. But because old people dominate primaries, Ron DeSantis is not winning the people who show up on game day. And that pretty much means I don't know if he can win a race in this. Can he win a state in this primary
I
cycle?
would say at this point, no. And I would say DeSantis.
I think it will highly depend on what the median age of a state is, or if he can win at a convention level. Maybe he can win a thing like Guam or something like that. But I think very unlikely he can pull it off. But here's my advice, because I don't think this speaks poorly to DeSantis as a candidate. I think he can just. Here would be my advice to DeSantis: stay in the race, register in all 50 states and the territories that vote thereof, collect as many delegates as he can, and see what happens at convention, but re-rack for 2028. These people aren't saying that they hate you. They just love Trump that much. But at the end of the day, where my analysis could easily go wrong is that if Trump loses in 2024, what is to stop him from running in 2028?
I mean, they're the only really,
Jail,
yeah,
right?
jail or death, but
Oh, okay.
or
Barring those two things, which I
and
think is a pretty high bar.
possibly no money, but
Nah, people will give him money. I think. Although, are his fundraising numbers good? Because I don't think I have not heard that they're good. I know.
but he didn't spend nearly as much as other candidates. I mean, again, he probably doesn't need to spend as much money on his primary fight. Again, I don't think DeSantis is going to win another state. And a lot of GOP primaries, I think, is winner takes all.
A lot of them are.
And again, I would say DeSantis, for sake of self-respect, should drop out. And it's only diminishing returns to continue in the race. I mean,
Do you
it
think
comes
that
down
this
to.
could be a Reagan and Ford type scenario?
How do you mean?
So Reagan ran in 1976, but the Republican Party ultimately had Ford, but Reagan was then the heir apparent in 2020 or in 1980.
I mean, yeah. I mean, at this point, but it comes down to having self-respect. I don't think you gain self-respect by continuing to be in a race. You're gonna, especially if you come in third in New Hampshire, not even second, and then you take another beat down in South Carolina. I mean, again, you're
South
just.
Carolina just voted to table a bill or table an amendment that would have made child mutilation a felony.
Yeah, I
So that
mean,
South Carolina is not a serious state. Neither is New Hampshire. Iowa, I thought they were a serious state, but and so we've kind of covered one aspect of my analysis here. One was that DeSantis can't win the BoomerCons whatsoever, and I don't think he can change that. So that's part one of my analysis. Part two is Trump can't win with this low turnout. He cannot win in November if the turnout's going to be this low.
I mean, I
Keep in
don't
mind,
judge.
2020 was a high turnout election. 2016 was a high turnout election. We have not had high turnout on the Republican Party since 2020.
I mean, I don't want to judge turnout based on Iowa alone. I think there's a lot of, I guess, anomalies that happened with turnout given the whole weather
Well,
situation.
here's the thing: is the weather? Does the weather? Trump still won with the weather handily, and perhaps that kept DeSantis's voters at home.
Well, I think yeah,
But the weather is kind of the excuse, or it's the cover for what otherwise would have been a low turnout election. How
well,
about we? Obviously, this point is going to be observed over a period of time. Both my points are, but I don't think DeSantis can win the BoomerCons, and I think the primary is going to have very low turnout this cycle, and I think Iowa's just a start.
I mean, yeah, you could be right on the turnout. I just think it's too soon to call it. I mean,
I'm calling it.
New Hampshire.
I'm calling it. Even with Democrats crossing over into the Republican
Which I
Party,
don't think
the
happened.
turnout was at below 2008 levels in Iowa. Even with Democrat crossover.
Which again, I don't buy the notion that people are rapidly crossing over for national elections.
I think that's believable in Iowa because that's what Democrats do when they cannot win. They infiltrate the Republican Party. They do that where I live.
Well, yeah, they do that for local elections. They don't necessarily. They might not be as enthralled to do that on.
What else do they got going on in Iowa?
Oh, not a warm fireplace and a 0-degree day.
So in New Hampshire, it's an open primary. Maybe the turnout's higher, but I think in South Carolina we get very low turnout. And incumbents or establishment, in which case I would argue Trump is a little bit of both, they win in low turnout. 100%. And one generation votes for incumbents at alarming rates. And they dominate the Republican primaries. So those are my analysis on what is going to go on in this primary. And I don't know if we'll really have much to talk about moving forward. So Formosan Black Bear says Trump on a ballot will give you high turnout. This is an El Nino year. Weather is whack. Plus, people do not think Trump is going to lose. I do think Trump is going to lose. That's just I'm very pessimistic on this election cycle because I don't see a path in which Trump can win the Electoral College, and no one's ever shown me a path that's viable that he can win the Electoral College. I don't see him winning Pennsylvania or Michigan. Both those states have gone Democrat since. And then you have the Democrat senator in John Fetterman saying very based things. So he's not exactly killing the Democratic Party in Pennsylvania right now.
But he's not on the ballot.
He's not on the ballot, but you think he's going to campaign with Trump? No. So Joe Biden spent a lot of energy in Pennsylvania last time, or at least his campaign did. And then if we're just talking about the primary, maybe all of Trump's people showed up and none of DeSantis's people showed up on game day.
Again, I don't. I just think at the end of the day, the whole polls are wrong narrative. It was just
most of them were outside the margin of error on the results. So I don't think it's completely fair to say.
Well, the idea that Trump didn't actually have this indomitable lead like he was boasting about, or that the Trump campaign was overly concerned about their polls not necessarily reflecting reality. Again, I think that was a lot of hopium. And to some extent, I don't think we should discount polls just yet. Not to say we should relish in them, but I mean, again, I flipped on the polling narrative when I saw like Arn McIntyre not basically say, "Hey, the polls don't show it," and he just kind of accepted the polls as somewhat legitimate. And again, I know on the previous live streams we talked about whether the debate, not boycotting the debates, would be a good strategy for Trump, but that was predicated on whether DeSantis's poll numbers would improve from the debates, and that just didn't happen.
Yeah, and perhaps it was never going to happen. I truly think that there's no way DeSantis could have won with this voter demographic. He had no in with the boomer cons, and that was it. That was
But again,
it was game over for him.
I don't think his campaign tried or messaged properly either. So again, I do think the man,
he didn't go boomer con enough, or
pretty much he didn't go white working class enough.
I'm not sure.
And again,
I'm not
did
sure
these
about
things as his governor on his reelection campaign. Again, I kind of detailed. It's like, wow, if you look at how he ran his reelection campaign and the social issues he took up, it's like, wow, this was the guy. And then, but his general election campaign was not that. So I don't think his messaging was good. And even if the demographic was a hard sell or a hard pass, so even if he had a very Herculean task of winning over the boomer cons, I don't think his messaging was good.
I'm at the point where I don't think it matters.
No, I'm not saying it matters. Ultimately,
I don't think he had a message that could have resonated with the boomer cons.
No, but he probably did not. But
Vivek Ramaswamy basically copied Trump's message. Only got 3% with the boomer
problem
cons.
is with Vivek, you can't turn the hoe into a housewife, and that's Vivek. The boomers aren't going to marry Vivek. They're not putting a ring on him.
I'm just saying, like, messaging wise, what could he have done? And I don't think there's anything he could have done. That's my read on the situation. I don't think he could win based on who votes in Republican primaries against Trump. Well, and I think he should just re-rack the campaign in 2028.
Yeah, and I think if he re-racks it, he would probably be the front runner. Again, this is why bowing out now is about saving self-respect. That you're not going to again, the longer you stay in, the more likely it is you might humiliate yourself and have some kind of bad moment.
But at the same time,
your conscience moment, like a
Trump could pass away or end up in jail, and who knows how that would change the primary process. If he has over 15% of the delegates, that gives him a very good shot at some convention shenanigans. That would be my case for staying in.
I mean, I don't know what ballot requirements he would have regardless. I mean, what states he still needs to be on a ballot in.
I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I don't think Monday was not a good day for his campaign. No. And he's not going to do well in New Hampshire because that's a super liberal state. And they have an open primary with Democrats voting in as well. So we can't even get the independent vote in that state. And then South Carolina's the, fakest red state in the union. And then you have Nikki Haley coming from South Carolina. So his next race with a chance is a mano-a-mano with Donald Trump in Nevada. So it's going to be a long time between New Hampshire and South Carolina and Nevada, but he should probably focus most of his time on Nevada. See if he can win a one-on-one. It could happen because Trump barely won majority of people in Iowa. Yeah, like he got over 50% of the vote, but maybe in Nevada with more agreeable weather, things could be different. It'd be an interesting experiment because that's going to be a one-on-one primary because Nikki Haley's not on the ballot in Nevada. She's not a serious candidate. She's not running for president. She's running. I actually agree with Glenn Beck for once. and that she's running to be Trump's VP. I actually think that's going to happen now.
No, I'm not buying the VP
It's a
story.
dowry. It's Game of Thrones.
Like I understand
he's marrying the ugly princess to get the dowry.
I mean, I understand
So he's gonna go
logic
Ramsay
that
Bolton marrying Walda Frey.
I understand the logic that she comes with money, and obviously, those marriages, arranged marriage and all that with the Indian candidate. Have to make the pun, but again, I don't see it. Again, though, I did have this thought. I guess
Hey,
at work,
Trump is not dumb with choosing his vice presidential candidate.
I did have this thought though. It's just
But
like
we all think he's going to be dumb this time around and choose someone like Vivek, who Vivek offers nothing on the Electoral College for Donald Trump, right?
yeah, I mean, he's already from Ohio.
Ohio,
Trump's going to win Ohio,
but he's not relevant in Ohio politics, so
no.
it doesn't work there.
Tim Scott,
maybe.
I would like to see him,
but
not do token, not do woman. Kevin Stitt. You get some
who's
guy
endorsed DeSantis.
Yeah, but he's not necessarily as active as like Massey or Chip Roy on the DeSantis front. But again, he's a guy that would help him with energy policy. He would be almost Mike Pencean in a play for those white evangelicals. He's, I guess, I won't say boring, but he could help him. I mean, logistically, he could help him a lot in Pennsylvania or Michigan. A lot of those, Pennsylvania with a lot of the oil and stuff and natural gas in Pennsylvania. So that again, there's a lot of states like a Kevin Stitt would help Trump out. But I'm just going to say this out there, just throw it into the ether. Maybe that'll get picked up and become a national headline.
Yeah, I think he's going to do Haley, and here's why: the dowry is too much to encompass. If you look at 2016, he chose Mike Pence because Mike Pence was a sure way to shore up the evangelical voting bloc and turn out the base. It worked. The calculation worked, even though Mike Pence is, let's be real, I don't consider his faith to be all that genuine because faith without works is dead, and his works seem pretty unfamiliar or evil in the case of how he handled COVID. So Nikki Haley offers a chance to assure the moderate Republican and liberal Republicans. There really aren't moderate Republicans. They're just liberals. But that's who Donald Trump, if he realizes who he needs to win in 2024, he's going to choose Haley. And that's just, I think that's going to be a complete disaster. I don't think it's going to work for him very well, but that's who I see him choosing. I don't think I think it's a serious conversation in Trump world. That's my take.
I mean, I don't buy it. I don't buy it right now because again, obviously, since a lot of DeSantis people are kind of running that story, I do think it's almost like a reverse psychology where Trump will not do it just out of spite, or he'll maybe I don't buy the story overall. I mean, I don't think Trump's VP conversation is. I guess I just don't think it's Nikki Haley, and I don't know if the speculation on that is as serious as people have made it out to be. Again, Trump is
no one in Trump world's denying it though.
I think Don Jr. did.
I've heard other things. So,
but I mean, obviously, Trump is, literally the definition of mercurial.
So again, just to re-summarize what my points were. One is DeSantis can't win with the BoomerCon. He can't win the BoomerCon's over, which spells doom for his campaign on a primary state-by-state basis. Maybe that changes if Trump is convicted of a felony. Kind of don't think it will. And then number two,
I don't buy the polls on the felony thing.
And the second point is that I don't think low turnout is a good omen for Trump's election chances in November. I think the GOP has a massive turnout issue right now, and they need to do something about that. Trump needs to figure that out. Maybe he will.
Well,
that is what they need to figure out before November.
To Trump's advantage, the best thing that's going for him is he's not on social media or large presence on social media. So you don't have a lot of people just said they want Trump without Twitter, and then they can just, they can deal with it. And that's kind of what you're getting from Trump right now. that actually helps him a lot in a general election, where he becomes almost the stability candidate per se to those weak swing voters, and it almost resets the dial to 2019 going into that 2020 cycle.
I guess my question is, who is going to show up for a Trump versus Biden rematch? I think a lot of people are going to stay at home on that.
Yeah, I think so too, but I do think that might.
And that spells victory for Biden.
I don't know, because I think again, who's staying? I mean, again, it depends on who's staying home. If a lot of black people are staying home in Philadelphia, and let's just say that their names are not being submitted on a ballot in a mailbox somewhere, then that spells doom for Biden. Because again, a lot of those people, especially in those inner cities, they don't think their lives are improving. You know, the hood pass that Biden's accumulated over decades, despite his various color commentaries, if that goes away, that diminishes. You know, again, I mean, it's so easy to message to black people that, hey, the reason your rent's gone up is because Joe Biden.
But
The reason your car repairs are more expensive is Joe Biden.
you're trying to sell conservative politics to a matriarchal culture. That's
Yeah.
never going to work.
I mean,
You got to break the matriarchy in black culture if you want to win black people.
Well, you got to win. You got to project masculinity.
There's your hard pill to swallow, Matt Getz.
You got to pull away the black men. Like, and DeSantis actually did this in Florida.
He did.
He had like a 7-point differential between black.
Gee, if only we could have him in a national election. Because
I mean, well, Trump I think got 15%. So I mean, the gap is there. It just needs to be really. You just need to widen it. I mean, you can't do worse with black women. Good news is.
That's the good news. But yeah, I'm contrary to what Glenn Beck, conservative media, and Matt Gaetz are saying. Yeah, we're not going to flip a matriarchal culture red. That's not going to happen.
I would just say if you project masculinity, you'll get male voters of other demographics and pull them in.
I agree.
But you have to project masculinity. It's never going to work with Tudor Dixon in Michigan. It's never going to work with Carrie Lake in Arizona. It has to be a man that does it.
And no, Carrie Lake is not a viable VP choice. She's held 0 office. She brings 0 votes to the table.
Senate seat, so I don't see her ducking out of one.
Yeah, that's right. She is running for Senate, and then Blake Masters is running for Congress. So Arizona could be a state to watch, but if she loses that Senate race, even though it's a 3-man race, I'm just saying Carrie Lake is a terrible candidate this time around. And I think she could be the one person that could screw up a 3-party race in a race that's easily flippable for Republicans. So we do have another topic to move on to, unless you have any parting analysis on Iowa, because I made my points clear, and there's only 2 very long points, but 2 points nonetheless.
I mean, I made the point that, again, I don't think DeSantis's presidential campaign was up to stuff, even without the whole boomer. I guess again, I don't think DeSantis made a good sales pitch at all for his presidential messaging.
I don't know. Maybe it's just the Altus energy he gives out, but gets it done.
Well, again, I just don't think he said, "Hey, you white evangelical voter, I'm here to help you." He
didn't pander hard enough like Tim Scott did, and that didn't work. It's a tough job running for office. So, all right, let's talk MLK. And this has been pretty interesting to follow. Conservative media has definitely been shifting its views on Martin Luther King Jr. for a few years now. A few years ago, I used to see like obligatory MLK Day articles from like Dissenter or Pulpit and Pen Protestia, basically talking about, how he's a heretic and all that pretty obvious stuff, right? But you don't hear that come up in conservative media a whole lot, but you have started to hear that in the last few years. Last year, you saw Jason Whitlock take aim at MLK, specifically using Virgil Walker, which I know the guy's an anti-Christian nationalist, but he was pretty good on this issue.
All the crap that against G3, and surprisingly, they're actually, very good on this issue.
So give G3 some love. And you saw that John Doyle did a video on MLK last year, if
A
I
notorious video.
recall. What?
Notorious video.
A very notorious video. So MLK has definitely taken some shots in conservative media. I do believe it started with Discernment Ministries calling him a heretic and just getting that label out there. And then it took people actually reading what MLK wrote. I harken back to high school where they tried to do like the World House thing, and this was like and the sales pitch was this was MLK's idea. I'm like, this idea sucks. I don't care if it's his idea. It's not a good idea. It's just clearly flawed. You can't get cultures to just like each other and recognize that they have common interests when they have completely disparate values. So it was,
I mean, you can get them to like each other, just not when they're actually living in the same space.
oh yeah. So this year you've definitely got some controversy, or not controversy, but you got some renewed scrutiny on MLK. This article from Jason Whitlock. Martin
Blaze
Luther.
has been, and let's just take a break real quick. Blaze has been back and forth on this issue. You have a couple people absolutely slurping MLK, including Delano Squires, who is, I guess, with Whitlock somewhat. And then, Whitlock being a little bit more critical. But yeah, Blaze is like 1 minute they're just full blown neocon. The other, it's like, whoa.
And then Martin Luther King Day celebrates the destruction of the Black Church. And then the subtitle is actually even more based. The Black Matriarchy is a new religion of Black Christianity, and the Fulton County District Attorney Fannie Willis is its new face. So it's a pretty good article. And again, it just highlights where conservative media is headed. And we also have more. And here we go with Charlie Kirk. We've talked a lot about Charlie Kirk, and
this would be Delano.
He's on a very interesting journey.
Charlie Kirk is literally the definition of the Overton window. He is like, if you want to gauge who is the Overton window in conservative media, it is Charlie Kirk. If he's talking about it, that means the floodgates are opened.
Yes, because Charlie Kirk is like the Zionist, Israel first guy, and then earlier this year, he was trying to do the Winston Churchill triangulation. If we can just get Jews to embrace Zionism, they won't embrace Bolshevism. Didn't work for Winston Churchill, but he's going to make it work this time. But he at least went there. That's a major shift in the Overton window for Charlie Kirk. But the shift continues. And this video comes from Media Matters recording Charlie Kirk. So we know we got the good clip. Because Media Matters is just great for conservative media.
Go back and my favorite speech by MLK is actually the one he delivers after Rosa Parks gets arrested. So it's the opening of the Montgomery bus boycott. That's what makes him a national figure. And it's an amazing speech compared to anything you would hear from a public figure today. And it's stuff we would agree with. And I think even King agreed with it strongly at that time. He gets more left-wing over time. In that one, he's saying, if we're wrong that, the segregation is evil, that they can't be arresting us for wanting to have a seat on the bus. If we are wrong, the Supreme Court of the United States is wrong. If we are wrong, the Constitution of the United States is wrong. If we are wrong, God Almighty is wrong. If we are wrong, Jesus of Nazareth was just a utopian dreamer who did not come down from heaven. I might be missing a line or two there, but that's a good sentiment. And
that's not a good sentiment.
I mean, yeah.
Miss me with that. Miss me with you trying to make your social cause the contingency on which God is to be tested. Miss me with that.
Well, and throw in Zionism as well, because that needs to be thrown under the bus with that, because they do the same thing.
Hey, Bibi Netanyahu said that he's fighting darkness.
Is that the end of the quote?
I don't know.
Or some more.
Oh yeah, it's our fight. Yes, and something like that. It's our fight.
He even says, we should be thankful. Even as we protest, we are in America. We have the right to protest. This is our constitutional liberty. And we couldn't do this if we were in the Soviet Union. We couldn't do this if we were in a communist country. And he says that in the speech. It's a great speech, and he delivers it amazingly. So he's an enormously talented communicator. Even if he has to steal some of the ideas that he says in this or that speech, he delivers it super well. And like I said before, nonviolent, all of that's very admirable.
Now, but I want to get into that for a second.
sure.
So
This
there
is
was,
Charlie
though, an
Kirk talking, by the
indifference
way.
at times to some unacceptable mass rioting and murdering, right?
For sure. So he gets, the civil rights movement sort of gets, it gets more violent kind of quickly, actually, in the grand scheme of things. In 64, you have the Civil Rights Act. 65, you have the Voting Rights Act. But then the second half of the 60s is a lot of really bad rioting, much worse than we had in 2020. The Detroit riots in, I believe, summer of 67, 43 people die in that. That's more than died in
throughout
any of the
Floyd-a-palooza,
riots,
yeah.
in actual rioting stuff, as opposed to just murders because it was mayhem and such. But, dozens of people die there. Dozens of people die in Newark. You have thousands of buildings getting burned down all over the country.
Which led to a very crappy movie called The Many Saints of Newark, by the way. That's the worst thing to come out of that, right?
Well, it's funny because I mean, again, it's a great day when I start reading The Age of Entitlement, and we're doing this exact thing. And the chapter on race actually goes into all of this. How I quickly, like, the civil rights movement was largely riots and violence. That was basically the MO that I guess the black attitude at the time was to view it as a revolution, and they weren't necessarily interested in like the constitutional rights so much as the whole argument of human rights. But yeah, I mean, MLK didn't even view himself so much as an American in 1967, because I mean, he basically said, like there's an actual quote from MLK, and he calls America the greatest purveyor of violence, the cruel irony of watching the Negro and white boy on TV screens as they kill and die together for a nation that has been unable to seat them together in the same schools. So we watch them in brutal solidarity burning the huts of poor villages, but we realized that they would hardly live on the same block in Chicago. So, I mean, yeah, he was very anti-American, like basically leading into his death. I mean, the whole idea that the public wanted civil rights legislation is kind of a lie and a myth. I mean, unsurprising, Congress passing laws against the American interest. But I mean,
Civil Rights Act has come under a lot of scrutiny because it basically, A.D. Robles said, "What are your top 3 reasons for opposing the Civil Rights Act?" And I replied, number 1, D, number 2, E, and number 3, I.
Yeah, I mean, and you got a lot of people, Delano Squires, one of them, that's trying to say that movement in the 60s is not the result or is not the forerunner to the DEI agenda, diversity. And again, I mean, this is where, Christopher Caldwell's book, and that came out in 2020, I believe. So I think that's a huge Overton window shifter, is that book alone, because you have something that's very academic, but that goes through the history. Because again, I mean, if the news is fake, imagine history. I don't know who said that first, but it is true.
Yeah, and we've definitely been programmed, and MLK Day is a representation of how we've been programmed as a society, because we're, and here's what I put in the article, because I wrote an article about Christian Post simping MLK. I said if we judged MLK based on the content of his character instead of the color of his skin, he would not have a holiday. He would not be a celebrated figure. But we instead judge him by the color of his skin and not the content of his character.
And keep in mind, in 20 years, are we going to have Republicans saying you got to celebrate Juneteenth?
We have that now. Donald Trump's the guy who signed into law, if I recall.
No, I think it was Biden. It was after.
No, it was in 20 under Biden.
I thought it was 2021, but yeah.
Yeah, but Trump signed it after June, right? But yeah, Juneteenth is a fake holiday because it wasn't the end of slavery in the United States.
It was
the end of slavery in Texas.
It wasn't.
There's a difference.
Isn't just the reading of a declaration. in a particular town.
It's a
But yeah,
holiday for Texas. It's not a holiday for the rest of the United States because it's not the end of slavery in the rest of the United States.
but yeah, we're gonna have to. I mean, again, it's just as the whole MLK lionization, we also have this Juneteenth lionization that we got
It's
to nip
just
one, and we got to nip them both in the butt, really. But,
well, they couldn't get Kwanzaa to catch on.
you know,
It's 8 days or 6 days or whatever, so it's too long for people to really devote celebration to. So they instead did Juneteenth, and it's Kwanzaa in June, summer Kwanzaa. So that's basically what it became instead of a niche Texas holiday.
And his reaction to it, I've got it here, just a moment. His reaction to it is it's interesting. So first of all, in 67, spring of 67, a few months before is when he delivers the line, "A riot is the language of the unheard," which we heard over and over again in 2020.
That we did.
And then when the Newark riots happen, it goes for like a
condemn
week.
them,
It goes
right?
for about a week. And his advisor, the communist guy, who was with the Communist Party USA, he's telling King, "You've got to say something to condemn this." And King says he doesn't want to do it because he says, "I don't want to deliver a condemnation without also condemning the causes that lead to riots."
That sounds like
he can't just-
BLM.
That sounds like me on January 6th.
Yeah, he can't just denounce
But I
rioting.
want everyone to understand. Imagine what happened during 2020 with even more murdering, and imagine just remember how angry we got when CNN called it mostly peaceful.
Exactly.
And this is one of the reasons why MLK's numbers went down towards the end of his life.
Exactly. And so later that summer in 67, the Detroit riot, even worse, really bad. And then 3 weeks after this, he gives a speech at the Southern Christian Leadership Conference annual convention. And he quotes Victor Hugo, the author of Les Miserables, who says, "If the soul is left in darkness, sins will be committed. The guilty one is not he who commits the sin, but he who causes the darkness." So he sort of absolves these rioters of blame for, destroying a huge amount of the city of Detroit.
And people dying.
And he says, quote, "Negroes have committed crimes, but they are derivative crimes. They are born of the greater crimes of the white society." So that's a pretty strong statement. Even
That's a pretty, ungodly statement. Again, you're blaming systems for your individual sins. God's not going to hold that standard, by the way. So
if he
After
says,
the Civil Rights Act.
this is after the Civil Rights Act, after the Voting Rights Act, after the war on poverty,
and
from
after the Great
LBJ.
Society, and he's still saying that. Okay, Blake, please stay right there, okay? Email us, freedom@charliekirk.com. We want your thoughts, and I wanted to make sure that, after that conversation, we talk about the positives, and then we also get into some of the other implications of this. We're a truth-seeking show, but I can say declaratively, this guy is not worthy of a national holiday. He is not worthy of godlike status. In fact, I think it's really harmful. What do we have, guys? Rough greens?
well, and keep in mind, part of the reason that white people stopped, at first, okay, they wanted civil rights, but obviously a lot of them did not necessarily approve of the Civil Rights Act as it was legislated, because they might have agreed with, okay, yeah, get rid of those Jim Crow laws. We need to get all of America into modernity, so to speak. And yeah, those archaic medieval laws need to go away. A lot of Americans probably universally supported that, especially in the North. But obviously, like the perception of whether riots helped the civil rights movement or hurt the civil rights movement, again, going back to the book, like Black people were plurality in favor of riots helping civil rights movements. White people were like 74% against riots helping the civil rights movement. So the use of violence as a proper mechanism. Again, that's why the support from white people actually, in the sympathy of white people towards Black people actually dissipated as the 60s goes on, is because of the violence.
that and it, you're forcing people to care about something that's not really their issue. The biggest issue in the 60s was by far the Vietnam War. And, a lot of the segregation fights were regionalized. They're not, someone in California really doesn't care about your segregation issues. That's what you get out of the movie Remember the Titans with Sunshine, if you remember. So you had whole segments of the country that didn't really care about this issue, but they're being made to care. They're seeing the riots. Then the riots happen in their neighborhood, like Newark and Detroit. But again, they didn't. This was largely in the South. And you have them being made to care when they don't care. And then you see the riots. So they're not going to be super sympathetic. I want to catch up on some chat here. Innovation HQ asks, have you talked about how MLK accepted the Margaret Sanger Award? And
You don't say.
I didn't
even know that.
I didn't know that, to be honest. Wow. You're telling me for the first time, in the famous words of Donald Trump. Whew. I am like super not shocked by that, actually. MLK Conjunction Junction says if MLK had lived, he would have ended up as a shill for the Democrats and a grifter, a lot like Jesse Jackson or John Lewis. Bet. So, very true. So next we have based politics, which is neither based.
No, let me just also say, like, you get Civil Rights Act in 1964, and then the problem is, as soon as you don't see that your numbers are going up, your quality of life is perceived as improving, then you start saying, hey, we have legal equality, but not legal outcome. So then you start pivoting hard into we need legislated outcome. We need, quotas. We need, patronage. And then you get the plantation.
It's not enough to have personal responsibility.
Yeah, it's not enough to have, like, I guess, the enforcement of the so-called rights.
So we're going to move on to based politics, which is not based. Woe to those who call cringe based and base cringe. And that's what this entire thing is about. It's hosted by, was it Hannah Cox, I believe is the woman on here, and then Brad Palumbo. And I got to say, I find Brad Palumbo's views on underage Instagram booty to be very distasteful. And that's the type of guy that he is. But he wants to lecture the right wing on why we need to be accepting of homosexuals and transvestites. But, he's kind of the problem too. So, that's our groomer pretending to be based. So Hannah Cox is going to talk about how extremists hate MLK now. Because again, just having views that would have been normal 100 years ago is extremist.
Or how about during the actual 60s?
Or that.
Without necessarily
Kirk is the head of a
Klansmen.
youth organization called Turning Point USA. It's mostly a big Trump.
Youth.
Yeah. Mostly it's funded by really old people who like to hear young people say their beliefs back to them. And they have large conferences. They're very pro-Trump. They say they're, conservative, but they're really just kind of like a Trump shill organization. And Charlie's just a race baiter. He's an agitator. He likes to say things that get everybody up in arms and coming after him because that's how he gets more attention and then he gets more money. And
would you find that to be a good characterization of Charlie Kirk?
I mean, I just described him as the definition of the Overton window, so I would say no.
I'd say he's a grifter. I would agree with that.
Well,
but he's not a race baiter.
My question is he a grifter or is he a sellout? Because I do think those are two different things.
I'd say he started out as a sellout.
But you said he transformed into a grifter?
I would say he's kind of always been a grifter, but he started out as a sellout.
Well, because again, I think he notices things. He's a noticer.
He can't.
But obviously, he's like Matt.
He knows where the grift is.
But obviously, he's like Matt Walsh, where he notices, but he can't always say it out loud because he's probably beholden.
That's why he has to do the whole Winston Churchill triangulating.
Yes, but I don't know if a full-on grifter would do that though.
Well, I don't know if he knows what he's doing when he did that. Like, I don't know if he realized that Winston Churchill made the same argument.
Probably doesn't.
But yeah, I mean, these guys are gonna call other people grifters. But by the way, Evangelical Dark Web has more subs than this channel does, but they're like affiliated with like the DC Examiner, I want to say. So, and maybe as far as podcast ratings go, they're much higher. But I like to think that we got to win on these guys, so I'm gonna take it.
For some godforsaken reason, conservative donors, who the number one thing they'll talk to you about when you speak with them is like, we gotta do more to reach younger people, we've got to do more to like do youth outreach, and yet they keep giving millions of dollars to this kid who I would argue is one of the biggest turnoffs to young people I could fathomly imagine.
Well,
Like,
he's like a meme among young people. He's
yeah,
kind of a joke.
like
They
he was
meme
on
his
his show.
forehead all the time.
He what?
They make memes out of his forehead being a war mess.
Yeah. Well, like he just does weird stuff. Like he was on a show a few weeks ago wondering whether or not Taylor Swift had any eggs left. It's like, who talks like this? Like, this is creepy and weird and cringe, but that's who this guy is. So you don't know who he is, you're lucky. We unfortunately come across him all the time. And he decided to spend Martin Luther.
If you don't know who he is, you're lucky. We come across him all the time. Like, do you know like where your standing is in conservative media compared to Charlie Kirk's? And they're trying to like passive aggressively act like he's not a big deal, much bigger deal than he actually is. Like, you know, I don't know who Rush Limbaugh is, or you might not know who Rush Limbaugh is, but you know, in conservative media, we kind of come across him all the time. Like, what? I'm not saying Charlie Kirk is as big as Rush Limbaugh, but yeah, that
It's like
that's
you're punching up, but not acknowledging that you're dealing with like a contending, maybe not the heavyweight, but kind of the same thing.
I know, it's like
You're punching up without
you're trying to
acknowledging.
compliment your size. I think is what they're trying to do. It's like, okay, this video is ratioed too, in the like dislike category.
Luther King Jr. holiday bashing Martin Luther King. So I didn't listen to the full podcast. I think Twitter pretty much sums it up. So I'll cover what he wrote there. He said, "Who was MLK? A myth has been created and has grown totally out of control. While he was alive, most people disliked him, yet today he is the most honored, worshipped, even deified person of the 20th century. Today we are going to tell the truth and explain how this myth was born. Happy Monday." So he then took to his podcast where he announced a campaign against Martin Luther King Jr. And this got immediate backlash from mostly Black conservatives I saw, which I appreciate, because for the longest time, he's been allowed to get away with this notion of like he does all this youth outreach and he can reach people in the Black community and he's bringing all these like new demographics into the GOP. And there's no evidence of that whatsoever. He had Candace Owens kind of for a little bit as his token like proof, and she has no Black people in her audience that I've yet to see. So anyways, they actually kind of started speaking out. And I feel like for a long time, a lot of people would not speak out against Charlie because they were scared of like turning off his base or turning off his donors. But he really seems to have crossed a line because they were immediately pushing back on this. And it was widespread. I've got a few of these tweets I'll have you read in just a second. He then took to Twitter to make another post where he said, "The deification of MLK and his proto-DEI ideology marks the exact moment that the progress of Black America goes sideways. Their cities disintegrate, their families collapse, educational progress stagnates, they become enormously dependent on government support, crime explodes, and 25% of Black men are incarcerated by age 25. You will know the tree by its fruit." Brad,
I want to pause right there.
Full
Like,
100% true. And keep in mind, MLK looked up to a guy named Howard Thurman, who was essentially proto-Black liberation theology, just, I guess, on the Protestant side. Because I know liberation theology is generally associated with, like, communist
Jesuits.
Catholicism. Yeah, Jesuits. But yeah, there's I call it proto-Black liberation theology, because that's what Howard Thurman believed, and that's who MLK looked up to as a pastor. And again, he started a interdenominational church, basically Universalist, and that church is actually still around today. But
you see, what Charlie Kirk did is a huge shift in, again, we said that he was emblematic of the Overton window. Huge shift from a few years ago. You know what conservatives would say what the fall of Black people was the Great Societies Project and cocaine. So invention of cocaine, or sorry, crack, not cocaine. Invention of crack and Great Societies. Like, those would be the two things that are associated. But Charlie Kirk is trying to say that no, there is ideology that was proto what we see now that destroyed this community, that destroyed this group, this culture was destroyed by an ideology. And it wasn't, white people imposing Great Society Project. It was Black people embracing MLK's ideology.
Yeah, including a lot of like his essentially version of Christianity, which is all about being the underdog, the poor being set free, the chains being broken, not necessarily, the whole spiritual aspect, with sin. None of that matters.
So this is what we got for conservative media now. It's like they're trying to defend conservative PragerU level talking points from 5 years ago.
And PragerU also got ratioed on their MLK post.
Right.
Read some of these reactions to these comments he made from others online.
Yeah, so a woman named Kimberly Klasick says, loving the quote tweets here, Black voters considering voting for Trump in November, now changing their minds. Congrats, I guess. This must have been the goal, cause WTF else could it be? Another person just said, you are a garbage, bigoted human being, in quotes, with a human being.
That person was a relative nobody. The first one was Kim Klasick.
Yeah, the stripper, the
former stripper.
Who was exposed by Candace Owens.
Her and Candace don't like each other, but I think it's more of a catty female thing than it is ideology. But she's ran for Congress in West Baltimore twice and stuff like that.
Somebody named Charisse Lane tweeted, I wanted to follow up with this by saying that this is why I left his organization. I used to be an ambassador because I thought Charlie Kirk really cared about the Black community and opening our eyes to conservatism. In 2020, I quickly realized that was so far from the truth. He and several of his counterparts hate anything having to do with celebrating Black culture or Black progression. They are, in fact, anti-Black, and I realized I did not want to be affiliated with him or anybody with him, so I left for good in 2020. They're absolutely no help to the Black conservative movement or the Republican Party, and anybody who even cares an inch about the Black community for real would not associate themselves with him.
Okay, I got to pause right there because I'm calling fake news on that.
I don't even know who or what she is.
I don't know who or what she is.
If you go back to that,
that's purely because they didn't go full bore with the George Floyd narrative.
Yeah, that I mean,
there's no way it's anything.
You said 2020, so that kind of gives it away. But I mean, if you remember, the Groyper Wars were 2019,
right?
And everyone plays that clip of Charlie Kirk and Rob Smith, who's the token gay Black conservative who defends transgenders. And it's the, how does, butt sex win a culture war? Everyone plays that clip. And a lot of people were playing that clip like last year. Just like, whoa, come on, that's 2019. They want their videos back.
That's why I didn't join a lot of the conservative or Christian people too that were doing that. Like I'm pretty current on the Charlie when calling out Charlie Kirk or, giving him a bone every now and then. Cause I don't know if he's, I've called him out for his idolatry and stuff like that. But I will give him props on the MLK thing because that is a significant shift for conservative media.
But that's also why he shifted towards the Christian nationalism with TPUSA.
Poorly, but yes.
And more in the charismatic bent, I might also add.
And he's still having James Lindsay speak at his conferences. That's pretty gay. But yeah, I 100% think that person's objection had to do with
George Floyd.
100%. Book it.
Or Kyle Rittenhouse.
Possibly. But he didn't kill Black people. He killed white communists.
Not according to the media.
He killed a gay pedophile, right?
According to the media, that pedophile was Black.
Anthony Johnson, who's a pretty well-known Black conservative, said Charlie Kirk and his ilk are why Black conservatives can't fight Black Democrats. Y'all are a direct threat to Black America. We can't leave you unattended for a minute. So I want to go back to his second tweet, though, because not only is this, I think, racist on its face, but it's completely asshat backwards. Like, he's not wrong about some of the trajectory of the Black community beginning in the 1960s and 1970s. But he's completely wrong about why that occurred, right? So he talked
blaming it on MLK?
Like and I want to be clear, what he's actually blaming it on is MLK's achievements, which would be the Civil Rights Act.
Civil rights?
Basically saying that things were good under Jim Crow, and if it weren't for damn Martin Luther King Jr., none of these things would have happened.
And the other interesting thing, just to make a quick point, is he calls it MLK's proto-DEI ideology. That means like the pre-DEI or whatever. But what I'm actually going to explain when we talk about the left is that like the new DEI movement, diversity, equity, and inclusion, is in many ways the antithesis of MLK.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, MLK had a colorblind vision for the future and stated that many times. That is the opposite of what most people want under DEI. And look, I am not here to simp for Martin Luther King Jr. He was a very flawed
like, this is what they're trying to promote. They believe that MLK was a champion of meritocracy, and that's simply not the case.
It's simply not true. I mean, this is what we call the Patrick's wallet, where it doesn't matter how many MLK quotes that you throw at them, and the fact that you can talk about what MLK actually believed in like 1966, 67, 68.
And at the end of the meme, they're gonna go, "I have a dream."
Yeah, they're just gonna throw back. We all know that he gave the "I have a dream" speech. The question is, can you consider the fact
that was in 1963, right?
Yeah, 63. But
64, one of those years.
Can you actually consider for a moment that he said and believed other things, and that maybe that speech was just, in fact, a speech?
And not a representation of what he actually believed. But no one wants to consider that. Or now people are starting to consider that. But the
fact is, she actually says that, all that stuff started in the 60s. Well, he was alive for the majority of that decade.
And he was very influential.
A flawed individual.
He was a socialist. He did not share many of my views.
So a socialist, but you're treating him like a champion of colorblind ideology, and you acknowledge he's a socialist. You do realize that in America, the Marxist or socialist, whatever you want to call them, they use race to create the proletariat class, because people in America aren't starving like they were in, third world countries. So they use race. And she does not have a good pause face. Not as bad as David Platt, pre-beard.
But that being said, he was absolutely right on civil liberties and on working to overturn racist Jim Crow laws. And I've written about this extensively. I've done a whole video on this. I think his tactics for how he achieved that should be studied. I think his philosophy of nonviolence is brilliant and revolutionary and can be replicated today. And not enough people really study what he did during that time. So I can hold both of these things to be true. But when Charlie talks about the family's collapse, what happened after?
Now, it was in the John Doyle video that they would riot and then peacefully then switch to peaceful protest when the
it's basically the equivalent of you
hit and run tactics, I guess.
Well, basically you commit the personal foul, but the referee calls the flag on the other guy for retaliating
when the cameras are looking.
Yeah, the ref only sees the retaliation; they don't see the initial offense, and that's basically what.
And yell them off fast, doesn't she mean Gandhi's philosophy? And again, is India really better off than they were pre-Gandhi? And I would say no.
But they made it
of all the countries I would never want to visit, India's got to be very high on the list. Like, I feel like I would rather visit North Korea than India. You just got to really play it safe and follow the rules in North Korea, or you end up in a detention camp for life. But India is kind of like a nasty place, by all accounts, from everyone that I've ever, heard about it. And then North Korea, they show you the clean side, I guess. But yeah, India, and Gandhi, and he was also a sexual degenerate, by the way. So maybe there's
he made this
common thread.
Didn't he also, I won't say, egg into the whole Islam Hindu split?
Yes, he did.
So that was
But I think India would be better off under British rule.
No, as would
everyone.
Every
thing that Britain decolonized, would be better off under British rule.
I mean, can we also just point out the fact that
including Britain,
post-apartheid South Africa has been a failure, and that the apartheid regime was actually better for black people in South Africa than the ANC has been, and that
Right,
America.
and as it's apparently, out of bounds is extract to make that same point in an American context. On my point about British rule, I'm saying that if Britain didn't decolonize, they would be a lot more based. When they embraced decolonization, they lost themselves. They lost the eye of the tiger. They embraced the, degeneracy that followed, and the weakness and the effeminacy.
No, then they got colonized.
Then yes, when they stopped colonizing, they got colonized by, everything else, and then Hong Kong, of course.
Yeah, I mean, literally, they gave that back to a country that they didn't even need to.
Agree to.
They didn't even make the agreement with the CCP. They made it with the King of China.
So, but it made for a good scene in Rush Hour 1.
The Civil Rights Act is really important. You had the launch of the war on drugs, which has been used to target black communities and lock up black men in droves.
Wow.
It broke up the family. You also had the launch of LBJ's war on poverty, which, Brad, as you know, anytime the government launches a war on something, we get more of it. Poverty had been very quickly diminishing in this country up until those programs were put into place. And since they were implemented, we have seen it stagnate. That progress has actually stopped because of government expenditures in those areas. And that's because they did a lot of things to grow the welfare state, to make people more dependent on the government, to relieve men and women at times too, but mostly men, of the duties they had to take care of kids that they created and show up in the homes. They undercut the need for people to have jobs. And so these results.
This is just one.
This isn't the only
This is a part of incentivizing evil, but why is it that one group of people was incentivized to do evil and abandon their kids more than another group of people?
Well, can we just back up on the fact that she basically just played the race card with the whole war on drugs, imprisoning black people? Again, that's also false. I mean, the whole First Step Act, no, Trump was foolish for going down that route, and same with every Republican that voted for that bill. And I think it was a Paul Ryan gift. But the whole First Step Act, the premise that, a bunch of black people were incarcerated and the war on drugs, it's like, no. That was actually one of the best things Biden has done in his life, was sponsor the crime bill in the 90s. And
it's a rare Biden W.
Yeah, I mean, he actually did something
and
good.
A rare good bipartisan policy in the last 30, 40 years.
Perhaps the only.
In the last 40 years, probably.
And then, of course, the whole welfare state. I mean, at the end of the day, who voted for that? So, I mean, there's a lack of, I guess, personal responsibility. And then she kind of takes the shot at the men. The men weren't stepping up. No, well, there are plenty of women that
you don't want a man to step up. You have no ring on your finger, and you're
getting the check from the government, even if without being
married. And your partner's a Fanuc. So no, don't talk about you wanting men to step up, because you don't even what man is going to want to be with a girl whose, partner in business is a homo? It's not happening. So, don't get your man hating out somewhere else on some other subjects. You are not.
I mean, keep in mind, there's also the Moynihan report, which basically said that the government needs to invest in the black man and build up the black community. That was the key to success. But LBJ, Great Society, is just like, no, we need to empower the black woman to be without the black man and break apart the family. And
the Civil Rights Act did more to help women in the workplace, if anything, and that in turn did more to destroy the family and the single income household in the United States, and which suppressed wages.
No, look, the whole women in the workplace thing is the next chapter in Age of Entitlement. I haven't gotten there yet. I just started.
I'm just saying, but what did the Civil Rights Act accomplish? That is what it accomplished. More so than actual equality between race and skin color.
In the black community and in the country at large are the result of terrible government interventions into the market and socialism and welfare type programs that they were pushing to expand. So to blame Martin Luther King Jr. and the Civil Rights Act for these things is not only just absurd, it's so ignorant of history. Like, I don't know how this person has a platform. I am literally getting dumber just discussing his thoughts.
I think it's just edgelording. I just think he wants to be. Everyone basically agrees that MLK, while a flawed person, his basic principles are basically universally agreed upon now, of like non-discrimination, of, opposing segregation, of wanting a colorblind. Like, I have a dream that one day people will be judged on the content of their character and not the color of their skin. Basically, everybody nominally agrees with his most prominent teachings about politics and society. And so he has to.
We can agree. We might be able to agree that it's the most prominent teaching that he had, but it's not the most representative teaching that he had.
I mean, we're just back to Patrick's wallet, where
Right.
he's just going to keep. I mean, it's again.
I have a dream.
Yeah, it's almost like dealing with the Jehovah's Witness. They just keep referring back to "I have a dream."
Okay, yeah, and then nothing else that he could have believed. He didn't change his views over time.
To edgelord and go after it is really, I think, the only explanation. So while we're on this subject.
Alrighty, and yeah, he really should not be talking about Charlie Kirk's looks. Can I just end him on that note? So
no homo when I say it kind of looks like Rami Malek.
Who?
He's the guy that played Bohemian Rhapsody, and also on like Mr. Robot. Not necessarily a compliment, but maybe he's got a little Egyptian in him.
So, is there anything else to cover with MLK? Because I think these two getting wrecked, Charlie Kirk actually being somewhat based, and just the Overton windows shifting on this, and it's going to be an exciting thing to watch next year and the year after that, I think.
Well, I mean, you're going to start seeing probably more like Chris Rufo types really come against the notion of calling out MLK. Actually, no, Chris Rufo actually did make an MLK thing. John Harris, I think, talked about that. But that type of conservatism, which is really just neoconservatism, is going to go to the mattresses, and you're going to have like a little bit of an emerging, I guess, civil war or annual civil war on the right between like the paleocons, who basically are now going against MLK, and then you have the neocons that are still going to defend MLK. And this is, I guess, again, why the Republican and conservative movement actually needs to be like almost like pro-white, but yes, we need to stop being an anti-white party if we actually want to win.
If only. So we're going to move on to a new segment, and it's called Babylon Bee Breakdown.
Oh, Babylon Bee has been on fire lately. So this is just one example.
And so this was a massive headline. This tweet currently has 15.6 million views, and the headline is Trump promises Vivek an administration position running the White House 7-Eleven. Absolute banger. And you know who's offended by it is Tim Young, who's again one of those Christless conservative comedians out there. He's a comedian apparently, but he thought that this joke was offensive and stuff like that. I'm like, really? You call yourself a comedian and you're arguing against a good joke here?
That's not just a deadpan joke?
No, it's not a deadpan joke.
Okay. I do want to make sure. Wow. I'm honestly shocked.
This is an absolute banger by Babylon Bee, and it works on so many levels. One, it's kind of saying that Trump is going to stereotype, and Vivek is the guy to run the 7-Eleven at the White House because he's Indian, and Trump would totally do something like that, right? So that's one layer of the joke. Another layer of the joke is that Vivek Ramaswamy is caping up to Trump so much and simping Trump so hard, and then Trump only sees him as a 7-Eleven guy. Like, quick, a Pooh from The Simpsons. And then on top of that, Joe Biden made the comment like however many years ago about 7-Elevens being run by Indians or whatever. So many layers to this joke. I think it was a
I
pretty
mean,
good
even the
one.
fact that he's like a mid-level manager, I think is also like that's also kind of a I won't say a trope, but they kind of it also works on that level. He's not even just like he's the mid-level manager of a 7-Eleven.
But this got some hatred from Big Eva. Ed Stetzer went after this with his outlet Church Leaders. They wrote an article attacking Babylon Bee for this. And Daniel Darling went after Babylon Bee for this. He is the guy who wanted churches to administer COVID jabs. So the Babylon Bee made some pretty good enemies.
Oh, they had the short plane article. I don't know if you want to bring that one up.
Hey,
Okay,
don't get ahead of me.
I'm not getting
But,
ahead.
Man, that was an absolute
Like, yes,
banger.
this one's a
Babylon
10 out of
Bee.
well, this is a 10 out of 10.
This is a 10 out of 10. This is our segment instead of meme review.
Like, this is if you're getting roasted at like a formal roast, which Donald Trump actually did get roasted on Comedy Central.
The roast of Donald Trump happened several years ago.
Probably 10 years by now. So, yeah, this is what Vivek Ramaswamy would get.
And then this is the other one.
Yes, this one was savage.
Absolute. Another banger out of the Babylon Bee. Wow. Sorry, I just read the first comment and it stopped me in my tracks. And this banger from Babylon Bee, Delta introduces a new short plane for special needs pilots. Absolute wow out of the Babylon Bee for that one. And then the comment underneath is, and for the visually impaired. And it has a blind stick. So that's the Babylon Bee this week. Absolutely.
I'm sure there's a 9/11 joke in there somewhere about the blind stick. I'm sure there is.
There should be, maybe. But yeah, it's been a pretty good week for Babylon Bee. I know sometimes they're kind of cringe. I'm talking about Joel Berry for the most part, but this was a pretty good week for Babylon Bee.
And then they're also the only conservative outlet that covered the tunnels underneath the synagogue.
Not the Bee.
No,
the Bee or
Babylon Bee. They at least gave a satirical article about it, which is more than what the Blaze and Daily Wire did.
I know. Why did
like they had to do it backhanded, very backhanded.
A very important article on tunnels completely gets buried. I don't know. I tried to do a pun. So I think that concludes our Babylon Bee breakdown. I'm going to give a last call for questions, but I do got to say, some breaking or some news from earlier today. Gavin Norton blocked me on Twitter. So I did the video on him earlier this week, and I called out his lie on Josephus and how he said that Josephus, believed in a local flood, which he didn't, but he lied about it using some Jewish scholar to do so. And he didn't like that I called him out for that. He didn't like my quote tweeting him and insulting Tim Keller and his relationship to the Keller Center. And caught that one.
For the record,
I just think that's funny. I wonder if you have any thoughts on that whole controversy with Gavin Ortland.
This is why the whole defending the flood is very important. Again, I have good respect for ministries that I guess do a lot of the apologetics, because we do need good apologetics. And the problem is
Ken Ham.
The problem is that a lot of our apologetic, the more, I won't say mainline apologetics, is a lot of them are very weak.
A lot of the YouTube apologetics are extremely liberal.
Yes. And they skew heavily liberal. We did the article on Frank Turek last month on women pastors. It's just wow, you can be so clear and concise on all these other issues, but you can't actually, read what the Bible literally says. And, we're not even doing like literal versus wooden, or we're not even, what a plain text, reading of the scripture says.
Yeah, it's interesting because you got inspiring philosophy who's pretty cringe, anti-Christian nationalist, won't debate the issue despite the fact that he's a debate me bro. And then you have Cameron Bertuzzi, also pretty liberal, fake converting to Catholicism. I would say he faked it. When you create an entire Twitter account so that people who are interested in your Catholic journey can follow that, so your Catholic journey doesn't distract your Capturing Christianity Twitter account, and then you don't follow up on any content that's Catholic related after you milk the interviews, yeah, you were lying. He's not really Catholic.
Or maybe he realized that the confirmation process is a lot more work than he thought it would be.
No, Catholics are adult Catholic converts are generally confirmed around Easter.
No.
So so it didn't happen. He said it would happen, but it didn't. I actually wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't actually go to church. Have I been doing research? So actually, I'll get to that question after I'm done on my overarching point about Christian YouTubers. Obviously, Ruslan KD is kind of a little woke. Lecrae actually walked back. So last week I did a stream on Lecrae, right? And he's like, all right.
It's a little worse than I thought.
It's a little worse than I thought. I'm like, dude, it was that way the entire time. The dude was a transvestite in the music videos, and you're acting like there's something genuine in his faith. It's like, no, there's not. He made it very clear that he's just trying to attack Christians. And Christian Post ran an article about his apology, which was super fake, by the way, and not accepted, by the way. Just want to be clear. He's like, oh, I did the communion thing to kind of break the ice. Like, no, you didn't. You know what you're trying to do. And you even say in your song, you get all the gays hyped. So there's nothing biblical about your music. But people who serve the devil will lie and lie with impunity. So it's been an interesting year already for Christian YouTube. So I don't know if you had anything. You're usually the one who gives me the Christian YouTuber stories.
Yeah, I mean, I had that's why I have the Frank.
I'm like, you missed out on the Gavin Ortland one, but you gave me the Alistair Begg story, so it totally is worth it.
Well, I mean, again,
the Gavin Ortland story was bigger on Twitter. So,
but I mean, yeah, the defending the flood, and again, these are a lot of times we might consider these yesterday's issues, and I do like what David Harris said about how now the issues on college campuses aren't necessarily flood, evolution, it's social issues, because at the end of the day, when people just like their sin and will look to an excuse, and with the evolution, it kind of gives them the worldview to excuse away a God that is righteous and essentially excuse away any moral accountability to their actions. It kind of works, and that really becomes the real heart of the issue of what they reject about Christianity in general, is the moral aspect. They love their sin. They don't, it has nothing to do with whether they genuinely believe that monkeys and, you can prove the evidence all day long about the whole, molecules to man or microbes to man. You can disprove that all day long, and the complexities of abiogenesis. So, I mean, you can apologetic, or even the fossil trail, or even how the, another argument with the delusion or the flood is just the way the continents, the plants, and how the fossil record doesn't necessarily match continental drift. And I could go on, but again, you could go through all the different apologetics angles, and creationists have done this. So I mean, there's generally an answer for every inquiry you have.
Now there might be multiple answers because we don't know. We can't affirmatively, say what exactly happened, but we can give possibilities. But again, if it contradicts scripture at the end of the day, that should be rejected. So, question came in: have you been doing research on Alistair Begg, if he has other big errors or compromises? A
I've
lot of it
honestly
has come
tried.
up since the article was written.
You have something?
There are concerns about him being a little side B, him on the issue of egalitarianism. So there's stuff like that I've seen come up.
I mean, I could pull something up, which right now, if you want me to share it.
Sure.
Let me see.
So,
all right, am I up? Because
yeah.
so this article, this is something I came across in my research. So I don't necessarily think, okay, is this the evidence? If you had to come up with evidence that he was a little weak on the position, I kind of watched it. Like he's defending, like I guess there's a anti-conversion therapy law that was going on in Scotland, and he came out and supported the pastors that were against the law. All good, right? So, but the actual quote in question is this one right here. Addressing the issue with forcefulness doesn't mean we can't address the person with gentleness. There's another, I don't know if it's in here or not. Oh. Of course, activists claim biblical teaching is coercive, but Calvert puts it to beg that coercion is sinful and does not characterize faithful Christian ministry. So I think these are some evidences that he's a little bit weak. Again, this could
Well,
also
his
just be,
response to it is he agrees with that.
well, I mean, I think when watching the video, he actually says that coercion itself is sinful, which again, I disagree because the law is itself coercive. I mean, it's almost like people want to be very libertarian with this, or like anarcho-capitalist, where, you know, it's my property, I can do whatever I want and no one can stop me. But, you know, as soon as, or I guess I'll use the anarcho-capitalism argument where it's just like, you know, everyone's their own island. But again, as soon as you try to say that you can't do something on your own property, even if it's as depraved as murdering your own children, that's what's called a government, because they're basically saying that you can't do X on your property. So
right, there's a
that is
limitation to property rights that I don't think a lot of libertarians, grow up and realize. Again, I don't think libertarianism is biblical. That's a topic for another day, though.
But that in itself, I mean, the existence of laws is in itself coercion. I mean, we kind of have this whole idea that, oh, you can't bind conscience.
You can't legislate morality.
You can't bind conscience. People have freedom of conscience. It's really not true. Same with the legislate morality. You can't legislate.
I mean, there's limitations to conscience.
Yes, but it's not saying you can't think something. It's saying that you can't. Well, we're saying that, or I'm saying that the argument is you can bind someone's conscience, and that a law in and of itself does bind conscience. I mean, if you take away theft laws in San Francisco, you get stealing. You get widespread theft caused by the same people rioting in the 60s that, you know, are continuing MLK's work. And those people, like, if you take away the fetters on their conscience, they will steal. If you take away the laws against murder, people will murder. It's kind of like the purge, where, you know, if you unshackle the laws for a 24-hour period, people would take to it. And you would have violence. And that's why, again.
Now, the joke in that movie is that every other day of the year would be fine. It's like, no, that's not how human nature works.
So, I mean,
we have another question.
So, yeah, I mean, it was a statement like this, even though he's Orthodox, you can kind of see maybe it's that Scottish liberalism, you know, kind of like a Canadian trying to talk about American politics. They don't quite get it. And that's kind of what I heard in that interview without necessarily seeing him go into like go over the rails.
And last question: will you do a live stream on the PCA 2024 assembly?
Did they even have that?
It is live streamable. I don't know if I'll be able to swing it. it's not as big or glamorous as the Southern Baptist Convention. And I don't know the intricacies in the PCA GA as well. And it is a nerdier affair. That's just undeniable. But I can see if it fits. I just don't know the schedule off the top of my head. And I believe last year went on during the Southern Baptist Convention. So, I couldn't exactly do it. And it wasn't as exciting last year. Like they didn't get a whole, it wasn't as actionable as the couple prior years. So we'll see. But I'm leaning towards no. So that'd be my answer in January. All right. But anyway, thank you all for being here. Don't forget to hit the like button on your way out. And like I said in the beginning, you can support our work over at evangelicaldarkweb.org/join. But the least you can do is like this stream, subscribe to the channel, to the podcast. If you are new, have a blessed night, and we will catch you on the next